The town library was a sanctuary for many, including me. I always found comfort amidst its tall wooden shelves and the scent of old pages. That day, as the sun streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on everything, I was engrossed in the romance section, trying to find a book that I hadn't read. A soft thud and the flutter of pages startled me, and I looked up to find myself almost nose to nose with a man who appeared just as surprised. He had hazel eyes that sparkled with amusement and a slightly disheveled tuft of brown hair. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I stammered, realizing I'd knocked a few books out of his hands. "I should have been more careful." He chuckled. "No harm done. I'm David." He extended a hand to help pick up the scattered books. "Amelia," I replied, grateful for the friendly gesture. As we collected the books, our fingers brushed against each other, causing a tiny jolt of electricity. I glanced up to see if he felt it too. From the faint blush on his cheeks, it seemed he did. "So, Amelia," David began, breaking the momentary silence, "are you always this engrossed in your book choices?" I laughed. "Only when I can't decide on my next fictional escape. How about you? What brings you to the library?" "I've been trying to find a good book on photography," he admitted, pointing to the stack in his hands. "It's more than just a hobby for me." Our conversation turned to hobbies, dreams, and even our favorite foods. It was surprising how easy it was to talk to David. We ended up abandoning our book search and found a cozy corner in the library's cafe. Hours seemed to fly by as cups of coffee turned cold and our conversation delved deeper. "I've always loved this library," David confessed, looking around with a nostalgic smile. "I used to come here with my mom. She'd read to me for hours." "Sounds lovely," I said, thinking about my own childhood memories. "It was," David replied with a distant look in his eyes. "But things change." There was an unspoken depth to that statement, hinting at stories yet untold. It made me even more curious about him. We left the library with a promise to meet again. From that day on, David and I were inseparable. Each date felt like an exploration, not just of the places we went to, but of each other's worlds. The bond we shared grew stronger, leading us to a beautiful wedding day where I felt like everything was falling into place. Yet, amidst all the joy, one figure stood out, casting a long shadow on our happiness. David's mother, Mrs. Marion Hughes. Her sharp gaze always seemed to linger on me a little too long, her smiles never quite reaching her eyes. I hoped that with time, she'd see how much David and I loved each other and accept our union. But that was a hope soon to be tested. The excitement of expecting a baby was overshadowed by the constant nausea and fatigue I felt. Every morning was a battle, and by evening I was utterly exhausted. David watched with concern, always by my side, supporting me in every way he could. One evening, after a particularly rough day, David approached the subject. "Amelia, maybe we should think about moving closer to family for a while, just until the baby comes." I hesitated. Moving back to David's family home meant being closer to Marion. "Do you think that's a good idea?" I asked, uncertainty in my voice. He took my hand gently. "It's just a thought. Mom did raise 3 kids. She might help with the baby stuff and, more importantly, support you when I'm at work." I pondered over it. "I'm just worried about how things are with your mom," I admitted. David sighed. "I know Mom can be a bit difficult, but she's still family. Maybe with the baby on the way, things might change. Give her a chance?" With a deep breath, I agreed. "All right, but if things get tough, we need to have a backup plan." The move happened quicker than I anticipated. David's childhood home was a large, old-fashioned house with creaking floorboards and a sense of history. The first day we arrived, Marion greeted us at the door, a broad smile on her face. "Welcome home, David," she said, hugging her son tightly. Then, turning to me, her tone softened. "And you too, Amelia. I hope your stay here is comfortable." For the first few days, Marion was the image of a doting mother-in-law. She made my favorite meals, helped me set up the nursery, and shared stories of David's childhood. It was almost as if the icy tension from before had melted away. One evening, while David and I were in the living room, Marion joined us with a tray of hot cocoa. Handing me a cup, she said, You know, Amelia, pregnancy suits you. You look radiant. I smiled. Thanks, Marion. And thank you for everything you've been doing. It's been a great help. She nodded. It's the least I can do. Family takes care of each other. The words sounded reassuring, but a faint trace of something in her eyes made me wonder. It seemed like a perfect setup, a haven I hadn't expected. But as the days turned to weeks, subtle changes began to emerge. The sweet facade Marion put up began to show cracks, especially when David wasn't around. I tried to brush off the unease, hoping that my pregnancy hormones were just making me overly sensitive. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Marion's kindness than met the eye. The days in the old house started to feel longer. With David often away at work, it was mostly just Marion and me. It didn't take long for her kind behavior to shift when we were alone. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich. Marion walked in, looked at what I was preparing, and said, "You know, David always liked his sandwiches with more mayo, but I guess he's settled for less now." Taken aback, I replied, "I didn't know that. He never told me." She shrugged. "There's a lot you don't know about my son." Days like this became more common. It was always a comment here, a remark there. Each time, she made sure David wasn't around to hear. One day, I was resting in the living room, going through some baby names. Marion came and sat next to me. "You know, Amelia," she began, "if only David had chosen someone more, well, someone better suited to our family." I looked up, surprised. "What do you mean, Marion?" She leaned in closer. "Let's be honest. You've struggled so much with this pregnancy. It makes me wonder if you'll be able to handle what comes next." I felt a sting in my eyes, holding back tears. "I'm doing my best," I whispered. Marion sighed. "For David's sake, I hope your best is good enough." Every interaction became a challenge. I tried to avoid being alone with her, but she always found a way. The house felt oppressive, and I started to dread each day. The only solace was David's comforting presence when he came home. But even with him, I hesitated to speak up, fearing it might cause a rift between mother and son. Things got even more strained when David informed us of a business trip he had to take. "It's just for a few days," he assured me, pulling me into a hug. "Mom will be here with you. Everything will be all right." The night before his trip, I overheard David talking to Marion in the hallway. "Please, Mother," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Promise me you'll take care of Amelia." Marion's voice was sugary sweet as she replied, "Of course, my dear. Don't you worry. I'll look after her." I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, sensing that the storm was far from over. With David gone, the house's atmosphere grew thicker than ever. Every room I walked into felt like stepping onto a battlefield with Marion. But as the days went by, I realized that I couldn't just keep dodging her verbal attacks. I needed to defend myself, and maybe even counterattack. The day after David left, I sat in our shared living room, browsing through online forums for advice on dealing with difficult family members. The consensus was clear. Evidence was crucial. That's when the idea of the voice recorder struck me. If I could capture Marion's words, I could finally show David her true nature. The very next day, I made a trip to a local electronics store. As I was browsing through the different recorders available, a friendly store assistant approached. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. "Something that can record voice discreetly," I answered. He nodded, showing me a small device. "This one's quite popular, easy to conceal and clear audio quality." I bought it immediately, feeling like I'd acquired a shield against Marion. Upon returning home, I found Marion in the living room. She was going through a photo album, probably reminiscing about the past. "Ah, Amelia," she said without looking up. "Come, see these photos of David when he was young. So innocent and unburdened. Before all this." I sat down, my new recorder discreetly activated in my pocket. "He always speaks fondly of his childhood," I remarked, trying to keep the conversation neutral. She gave a half smile. "Well, he had a mother who cared for him, who knew how to bring up a child properly. Unlike some." I took a deep breath, attempting to stay calm. "I'm sure we all do our best for our loved ones, Marion." She scoffed. Doing one's best and knowing what's best are two different things. I just hope my grandchild doesn't suffer due to your inexperience." I nodded, biting back a retort. "Thank you for the advice, Marion." Little did she know that every snide remark was being captured. The days dragged on, and I gathered more evidence. Simultaneously, I started searching for an escape plan, a place of my own where I could breathe. After a thorough search, I stumbled upon a quaint apartment nearby. It felt right, a sanctuary from Marion's constant onslaught. One evening, as I went over my recordings and thought about the apartment, I felt a surge of hope. This was more than just about standing up to Marion. It was about securing a peaceful future for my child and me. It was about ensuring David knew the truth. With renewed energy, I prepared for the days ahead, knowing they wouldn't be easy, but believing they'd be worth it. A few days had passed since David's departure. Despite my attempts to keep a distance, Marion seemed to be pushing harder, testing my limits. One particular evening, after dinner, she decided to bring up the topic of baby names. I was in the living room, looking through a baby name book David had bought for us. "Naming a child is a significant task," she began, settling herself on the sofa opposite me. "It should be done with care." I looked up, nodding. "David and I have a list. We're considering a few options." Marion tilted her head, her eyes sharp. "Well, let's hear them." Taking a deep breath, I began. "We're thinking of Lily if it's a girl or Ethan if it's a boy." She rolled her eyes. "Lily? Sounds like a name for a pet. And Ethan? So common." I felt my cheeks heat up. "They're just options. We haven't decided." Marion leaned in, her voice cold. "You know, in our family, we have traditions. David was named after his grandfather. Maybe you should respect that instead of choosing random names from a book." Stung by her words, I replied, "David and I will name our child together. It's our decision." She stood up abruptly, knocking the book from my hands. "You're so ungrateful. I've tried to help, to guide you, but you're just bent on ruining my son's life and that of my grandchild." I was taken aback. "Marion, I never asked for your help. All I wanted was some peace." With a mocking laugh, she retorted, "Peace? You think you deserve peace after everything you've done? You've turned my son against me." That was the last straw. "I haven't done anything. It's you who can't let go and let him live his life." Marion's face turned a deep shade of red. "You ungrateful wretch," she yelled, pointing towards the door. "Leave! I don't even want that child to be born." Shaken, I tried to hold back tears. This is my home too. But Marion was relentless. She reached into my bag, grabbing my keys, and tossed them out the door. "There, now go." Breathing hard, with my emotions in a whirl, I took a moment to gather myself. I remembered the apartment I had rented, my sanctuary. Picking up my bag, I looked Marion in the eye. "You might regret this." Without waiting for a reply, I stepped out, closing the door behind me. It was clear. The battle lines had been drawn. The next few days in the apartment were a mix of peace and apprehension. I missed David terribly and worried about how he would react to everything once he returned. The day of David's return finally arrived. My phone buzzed with a message from him. "Just landed. Coming home soon. Can't wait to see you." I replied, "I'm at the new apartment. Call me when you get to the house." 2 hours later, David called. His voice was a mix of confusion and concern. "Amelia, why are you in an apartment? Where's all your stuff? Why aren't you home?" I took a deep breath. "David, there's a lot you need to know." After explaining everything, from the voice recordings to the final confrontation with Marion, there was silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When David arrived, I played him the recordings. His face turned from shock to anger with every word Marion spewed. When it ended, he looked devastated. "I can't believe she said all those things to you. I'm so sorry, Amelia." Taking his hand, I said, "David, it's not your fault. I just couldn't stay there anymore." David's eyes were fierce. "We're confronting her together." We drove back to the house, and as we entered, Marion was sitting in the living room, feigning surprise. "David, welcome back. Where's Amelia?" David's voice was ice cold. "She's right here, and we've heard everything." Marion looked between us, trying to gauge the situation. "I don't know what you're talking about." Without saying a word, David played one of the most damning recordings. Marion's face paled. When it ended, David's voice trembled with anger. "How could you, Mother? She's carrying our child, your grandchild." Marion's eyes darted around, searching for an excuse. "David, you don't understand. I was trying to protect you." David cut her off. "Protect me? By tormenting Amelia? That's not protection. That's cruelty." Marion started crying. "I just wanted the best for you." David shook his head. "Your version of the best isn't what I want. Amelia and our baby are my family now. You need to respect that." Marion sobbed harder, trying to reach out to David, but he stepped back. "I need some time, Mother. Away from all this." Taking my hand, David led me out of the house, and we drove back to the apartment. The rift between mother and son was evident. But in that moment, our bond grew stronger, united against the deceit we had faced. The new apartment was a stark contrast to the opulence of the house we had left. It was cozy, with sunlight streaming in through large windows. There was something liberating about this modest space. It felt like the fresh start we desperately needed, a place where David and I could rebuild our life and prepare for the arrival of our baby without any dark clouds hanging over us. David and I spent the first few days setting things up. We transformed the second bedroom into a nursery, picking out neutral tones for the walls and assembling furniture piece by piece. As we painted the baby's room one afternoon, David said, "You know, all things considered, this place feels more like home than the big house ever did." I smiled, dipping my brush into the paint. "It does, doesn't it? It's smaller but feels warmer." While putting up a shelf, David found a photo from our wedding day, tucked inside a book. "Look at us," he remarked, passing me the photograph. Our smiles radiated pure joy, blissfully unaware of the storms ahead. "We've come a long way since then," I mused, placing the photo on the freshly painted shelf. "But we've also grown stronger together." David wrapped an arm around me. "I still feel guilty, Amelia. I thought going back to that house, to my mother, would be the solution. How wrong I was." I looked up at him. "It's not your fault, David. We made that decision together, and now we're starting anew, together." A few days later, an unexpected package arrived. No return address, but we recognized the handwriting. Inside was a meticulously knit baby blanket, soft to the touch, accompanied by a note. Reading it aloud, David's voice was filled with mixed emotions. "I hope this can mend our relationship. Marion." We exchanged glances, both pondering the same question. Could things ever go back to the way they were? After a deep sigh, I said, "It's a beautiful blanket, and I appreciate the effort, but—" David nodded in understanding. "I know. We need to protect our peace, our family. The past has shown us that." We were unified in our decision. Our focus was the life we were creating, the family we were building, and the love that remained unshakable. The baby's imminent arrival was our beacon of hope, and every corner of the apartment was a testament to that. We had carved out a sanctuary, distancing ourselves from past hurts and looking forward to a future filled with love and trust. Our new apartment became a symphony of baby cries and joyous laughter. Sophie, with her tufts of brown hair and curious hazel eyes reminiscent of David, was our pride and joy. The tough times we'd weathered seemed distant, like a storm that had passed, leaving only clear skies behind. David and I often found ourselves marveling at the little life we'd created. Late one night, as we were both up attending to a fussy Sophie, he looked at me with admiration. "You're incredible, you know. Getting through everything with Marion, and now being such an amazing mom." I smiled, gently rocking Sophie. "We did it together, and look at what we have now." I gestured to our daughter, who was slowly drifting back to sleep. One Sunday afternoon, as Sophie played on her mat, David proposed a little outing. "How about a trip to the library tomorrow? It's where our story began. I think it's time Sophie knows that place." I nodded in agreement. "Sounds perfect. We can make it a family tradition." The next day, the library greeted us with its familiar silence. We showed Sophie the very spot where we had met. David, holding her little hand, whispered, "This is where I met your mom, where our family story began." In that moment, standing in the midst of aisles filled with countless stories, we felt grateful for our own. We had faced challenges, yes, but they had shaped our journey, guiding us to this present moment. The library had been the start of our story, and now it played a part in Sophie's. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, life continued its rhythm. We shared tales of bravery and love with Sophie, always emphasizing the importance of standing up for oneself and one's family. Marion, although a part of our past, barely featured in our conversations. One evening, while putting Sophie to bed, I realized the true weight of the decisions we had made. By choosing our family's happiness and well-being over external pressures, we had set a foundation for Sophie to grow up, knowing the value of love, trust, and resilience. With Sophie asleep, I walked out to the living room where David was waiting. We sat, hands entwined, looking at the city lights. The world outside held challenges and uncertainties, but in our little apartment, there was only warmth, love, and the promise of many tomorrows.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread. hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.